Welcome back, Rodney, to episode 2 of the Association Event Insider with Connection Awaits. Today, it's myself and you, and we are going to be talking a little bit about aligning sectors and partnerships and how that all helps together to maximize the local impact of events. And I know that's something close to your heart. I think we omitted to start off last week on really just setting the scene properly on associations.
Well, it's interesting because we were chatting about that. And I think it's important for people who are engaging with associations to sort of understand the first principles. What is an association? Why does it exist? Last time we talked about the fact that they may have an event once a year, twice a year, once every 2 years, but they exist 365. So the association itself is an entity. If we talk about it from this week's perspective, it's a grouping of people and organizations to come together because they self-identify as having something in common. I call it the herd. They're a herd. Why this is important is because if you're trying to understand them, then you need to know why they see themselves come together. It's also really important. Many associations have different herds within them, and sometimes you'll see their events might be run for the technical side or the strategic side or the advocacy side. Same association, but the purpose of the event is different, so therefore the audience will be different. This all comes back to people who group together. I never forgot the lesson I learned many years ago when I was talking to a guy from California, and he was in energy. When you turned your gas on at home, it came from his company. And I said to him at the conference, who do you want to meet? And he said, I want to meet the people from Chile and Japan. And I thought, wow, why? And he said, because we all have earthquakes. You and I are both in the business event sector, so we come together because we're at that. If our women's teams were playing each other in football or soccer, which they've done recently, then you'd be in a different herd than I would be. We would self-identify as being in a different group. So we could be having a conversation 1 minute with one herd hat on, and then another minute we're another herd. But it's important to understand that people self-identify and associations come together because they self-identify in that space. So
that's brilliant, and thank you for mentioning the different compartments within the association themselves. That's something that DMOs should be very aware of when we're looking at the objectives of what the event is, who is the audience, and what are their aims from that particular event. I'm going to ask you a question now that to a lot of our DMOs, especially across Canada, it's very relevant at the moment. We work hard to identify what our unique economic sectors are within our destinations. We've been doing that work alongside Destination Canada for probably 8+ years now, and it's really a way that we've differentiated our nation. I want to ask you, is it essential to have a thriving subsector of excellence that aligns with your particular association when you're looking at the bidding process?
I can give you 3 answers, yes, no, and maybe. Let's work our way through those. Our most recent event was a technical conference in the energy space. They held it in Banff. Our Canadian member, based in Ottawa, decided to host the event in Banff. Now, Banff is not a natural energy sector, a gas sector, so it was interesting because once that decision was made, I didn't see any delegates go, I'm not coming because it's there. But is it a barrier to people coming if the decision is made for your city? I think not so much. That makes sense. Some bureaus are very parochial, but some industries are very parochial. If they're parochial, they'll always see the world inside their box. Sometimes it's hard to move outside of that. What about diversified industries that have no natural base? If you're not careful, you'll eliminate yourself by going, we don't have a natural base in that industry, but maybe not many other people do, because if an industry is very diversified, potentially a very bad example, but general practitioners. Every city's got a doctor. Now, if they're specialists, they might come together in the big cities where the specialization is. But if they're general practitioners, well, they're everywhere. So it doesn't matter where you have it, it's not home for somebody else. So think about industries where you might decide not to bid because you think we don't have specialization, but is specialization necessary for that industry? So don't close the door on it. Also, an association usually reps some portion of the value chain of an industry. You'll hear me all the time talk about the industry and not the event. The event only occurs because it adds value to the industry. What's the industry doing? If an industry has a value chain, if you're doing a trade show, it's pretty simple. Someone's buying, someone's selling. So you want to put the buyers and sellers in the room together. If it's a conference, then it's a knowledge exchange and a wisdom exchange, increasingly, not an information exchange. In that case, you're trying to put the people who are providing or facilitating the knowledge and the wisdom with the people who are wanting to share it or contribute towards it. They mightn't be as hung up on the fact where the venue is. When you're actually sitting in the venue itself, There's
Yep.
no difference. You can put that venue anywhere in the world. So it doesn't make any difference. It's what's outside the buildings, but in your city. Is it something
Yes.
that will help you win a bid? We talked about this in the last one. You might have a champion,
Yeah.
maybe a champion not going to work. Your champion mightn't have the influence you think they might. And also, when people come, will they have an experience outside of the building that's relevant to their industry? I don't know what it's like, particularly in Canada, but I've seen in some industries a decline in the interest in technical tours. They used to be, and even so, if you look at a lot of technical tours for a lot of conferences, it might only be 10% of the people who go on the technical tour. If the percentage of people going to the technical tour is low, then that starts to tell you that most of the delegates are not hung up that it's in that particular venue. It's not a matter of being right or wrong. It's a matter of just putting it on your question list. If you ask different questions, you'll look at opportunities in a different way. Whereas if you're just doing, I've got to go through the numbers and I've got to tick the boxes on your standard form, then you're going to keep getting the same outcome. But if you broaden your questioning a bit, I think there's an opportunity. That last one was, does your industry in your city have a value chain? But what's the bit up or down from the value chain? Because sometimes that information might be wanting to be moving between parts of the value chain, in which case you mightn't be the location for the association, but you might be the location for their customers or their suppliers or where the technology comes from. And that way you're having a broader perspective. Ask better questions, automate your question when you're looking at your profiles, and you'll start to come up with, not all the time, but you'll sometimes come up with different answers, which opens the door. Then it's empowering. You then have a reason to present to those people.
Yes.
Ask the association if it matters. Don't assume that they want to go. They might be bored stiff going to the 3 cities in the country where they are. They want to go somewhere else. So don't assume that's the case. Remember, do your bidding before the bidding opens. Ask them the question before the bidding opens. If they go, no, we don't care, well, bang, away you go. If they go, no, we're absolutely locked in on this, maybe you're wasting your time going down that path. But either way, that's a good outcome. Who wants to waste your time? Or do you get a better option? They're both good outcomes.
Very interesting answers, and you've thrown a bit of a curveball there in our direction, Rodney, because we had a very strong inclination that bringing the city to life, so that outside the 4 walls of the convention centre, was a key component, and getting more so with maybe younger delegates who really want to understand the DNA of a place, to get a feel for, could I move here? Could I work here? Could this be somewhere that my family could integrate into life? I'm going to park that one, and I think we might come back to it in future episodes, because it's a very interesting one on what that looks like. On this sort of same-ish topic, what practices have you seen, best practices, where there's been an alignment with event partnerships and what's happening in the sector, maybe from a corporate perspective or a post-secondary institute education? How have you seen that work well in your experience?
Have expertise in, say, medical conferences. And medical conferences are such a large percent of the industry. In trade industries, where my experience is. I asked myself the question, is it going to get more delegates? Is it going to have a better delegate experience? And if the answer is no, or only just a little bit, then you might have the tail wagging the dog. It comes back to context all the time. And particularly just because you think you have some part of the value chain of the industry that they're all going to be grateful for, doesn't mean they will. I never forget talking to the marketing person from one of the resorts up on the coast of Queensland here, where it's all sunshine all year. I said, why do people come to your venue? He said, oh, because they get so much choice. We've got tennis courts and we've got jet skis and stand-up paddle boarding. I said, do people use these things? He said, no, most of them don't. But they've bought into the fact that they can. So it's the buying into something that you want to have as the hook when you're bidding, but it can be quite a different outcome at the point of delivery. Now, I would say, if you went to a really great conference with diverse people by experience, by geographic location, by industry sector, you probably would get more value about understanding where you could go and move if you were a young person in the industry than just being in one city. Because you pick an anonymous city, call it City X. Living in the city doesn't matter if you're not interested in the business opportunity or the work opportunity or the career opportunity. So you're really trying to find out about the career opportunity. I would argue a lot of cities don't particularly leverage that, nor does the conference let them leverage that. The delegates come to town, they're mostly in the building, they get wheeled outside for a welcome reception and the mayor stands up and says thank you, and there's some entertainment and all those sorts of things. For an awful lot of it, you could be sitting anywhere in the world. It's like going to a shopping mall. I don't know what country I'm in. And it's only probably the 10% that they get that is particularly specific. So using young people as an example, unless part of the program is we will provide people with the opportunity to speak to the senior people or even their peers and colleagues from the industry see why Edmonton, using the example you might refer to, then don't expect it's naturally going to happen. If it's not part of your strategy, it's not naturally going to happen. And also, if it's only the tail, not the dog, don't have the tail wagging the dog.
Love that. Give it a very interesting perspective. So as a DMO, I'm putting that hat back on. That was definitely my experience. How could we support that? How could we help to influence somewhat what's on the agenda? And if it's rather than taking the delegates out, it's bringing the locals and the essence of a city in. Have you seen that done well?
I tried to convince someone once to be the host of the event in a country that was other than their own. And they struggled to do it. And I'm going, you're missing the point. When everybody's in the room, you're the voice.
Yep.
At the welcome reception, you're the voice. At the dinner, you're the voice. It's only when they go outside the building to have dinner or maybe to go and inspect something on site. That's the only time it is specifically local.
Yeah.
I didn't have any success in that space. I have had success actually in saying, if you're looking at bidding, particularly if there's a membership entity in there, if there's a member, you might have, for example, a provincial member. So you might have a national association and there's a provincial chapter or whatever for each of the associations. There might be chapters that will never bid because they don't have the scale or the facility or their province doesn't have the infrastructure to host it.
Mm-hmm.
Why not make them part of your bid? This is happening in a bid that I'm involved with now, that one of the bidders has come forth and said, we've spoken, I'll use the Olympics as an example. Australia, I think we're about to break record. We're about to host the Olympics for the third time. And New Zealand will never host the Olympics. New Guinea will never host the Olympics.
Yep.
Timor-Leste is never going to host the Olympics. So why don't you think about presenting them as part of your story? They're no threat to you. And actually, even if they are a threat to you, maybe you have a relationship with them where you say, hey, why don't we both bid this time to run it in my city? And next time, we'll both bid to run it in your city. You almost take a competitor out of the loop, but you're doing the best interests of the people who are the delegates going, we're working together. You're perceived to working together. So I sometimes say, look at people who are part of the association that may be not either able to bid or not in the cycle of bidding and see whether they can be a part of what you do. And if you go to global associations, well, then given the current dynamic in the US, you may be even the Canadian Association saying, and we've had the situation where Canada and the US in some events before have co-bid, right? Because they've overcome the parochial bid. The argument always was, it has to be held in somebody's city and the other city was a loser. And I'm going, wrong approach. The city that's not the host doesn't have to go through all the effort of organising it. They just get all the glory of being at it. So there's actually something to be said for engaging with others, Canada and Mexico, Canada and the USA, people who've got some commonality, North America free trade. Just find ways that people come together, and maybe there are people who could support your bid who would never bid themselves, but would be really appreciative. And the owner association would see the collegiate nature of it as being a real plus for them.
Yeah, we're seeing it in soccer. We're seeing it in FIFA when there's North America. So we've got that Canadian, US, Mexico combination. I see what you're saying. I think there's probably a lot of cross-collaboration opportunities for learning as well through that kind of approach. And there's a few cities here, and I'm not sure if you've seen it elsewhere in the world, where they do have a specific collaboration where they do try to pass events between the cities on a multi-year contractual basis. Have you seen that happen before?
You see people do it informally through some of the groupings of bureaus, best cities as an example. Some people do it at the PCO level. So the PCOs come together and say, you're at their one, I can run it for you in the next one. I haven't particularly seen the one that you've referred to, but what they're doing is they're identifying people who've come together. And COVID sort of gave people a bit of a shake-up in that space. I would even think what's happening in the US at the moment will give some of that space a bit of a shake-up, because it's not business as usual. And when it's not business as usual, you can either sit on your hands and feel sorry for yourself and cry and hope the world gets better, or you can say, hey, opportunity to do something different. And I often say, what happened out of COVID and what's happening in this North American environment, people will accept that you're trying to do something different. And if it doesn't work, they can always go back to what it was. It's because there's uncertainty that there's permission. That's the thing I say.
Love that. Uncertainty allows permission. I think that can be a tagline that you can definitely crown. Very good. I'm going to ask you another question that, again, it's sort of along this collaboration line at events that you've organized or ones you've attended in your career. Have you ever seen a cross-sector, either partnership or activation, where we see the realtors learning from the engineers, for example?
I do quite a lot of work in the oil and gas sector. When COVID came along, somebody on the technical space said, we know things are bad when the commercial space wants to talk to us, because the commercial space was trying to sell energy in a different way, but they needed technological solutions. So it was really quite interesting. He said, they never talk to us. You know things are bad when they talk to us because we have a solution to fix their commercial thing. There was this interesting one. You can, once again, let's come back to these herds. People are the same or different. How do you find them being the same? How do you find them different? The oil and gas sector is in many ways very different from the mining sector. Iron, gold, nickel, all the things that happen. And there are associations usually for each of those sectors, the mining sector and an oil and gas sector. If you look at them in a different way, what they have in common is they're both extractive industries.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a case example in Australia where the Mining Association and the Oil and Gas Association, that's not what their names are, but that's who they represent, come together for a tax conference because they have to deal with the same issues about extraction taxes and royalties to states and the provinces and federal governments. They found that the herd was taxed. Now, the people in the room at that would be the financial people, the CFOs, the tax people, the tax lawyers, all of that sort of stuff. But that's the group, that's the herd. I spent a lot of time in my early career in the exhibition industry. And whenever I went to industry events, I always found the exhibition people. When I went to association events or the IMEXs of the world, whatever it happened to be, I was always wanting to seek out for the informal interaction. I was always wanting to seek out my colleagues and peers from around the world in the exhibition space. And it was a completely different world than the conference space, completely different. It's gobsmacking how different it is, even though they both work in the same building doing the same thing quite often. So finding that way that you become a herd of something is a natural place to do that. And that can be things that you share. That can be health and safety. That can be governance. The Association of Association Executives, as they are variously called around the world, bring associations of unrelated industries together because the commonality is someone has to run an association. They have to do governance, they have to do membership. That's probably a very good example of it. When they get up in the morning and do their job, they're not interested in the other industries. What they're interested in is the other way people will run their association. Once again, no right or wrong answer, but just ask yourself the question, do these people belong to another herd? Sometimes I say when you create personas or herds, I say a herd is one person and find all the other people who look like them, and that's a herd, or it's the universe and break it down till you've got a group of people who look like each other. And all you're trying to do is to say, if there are ways to have events that don't seem like they exist, find the commonality of the herd with that hat on. Asking the question is almost more powerful than getting the answer, because if you don't ask the question, you never look for it. Ask the question, you'll go looking for it, and you'll be surprised. And you might be surprised how people go, no one's ever offered that to us.
That's where we were going with this question, was maybe this becomes a piece of differentiation for cities. Maybe it starts conversations actually internally in cities as well, when the conference has been and gone, that you have this commonality that maybe hasn't played out before. And I must admit, this was a question seeded in something that was brought to the forefront probably in 2020 now by my academic crush, as I like to call him, Professor Greg Clark, who talks a lot about different possibilities around urbanization and the business events that occur. Threw you that one because it was interesting to see. Now, final question on this particular episode today is around the importance of international associations aligning with local government priorities where they're actually hosting. Is this something that's even a consideration? Does it ever formulate a part of the agenda?
I'll go down the yes, no, or maybe route again, okay? First of all, the association, if you're looking about an international event, generally speaking, you've got a global association headquartered somewhere in Europe, in often the USA, or increasingly in places, not numbers-wise, but trend-wise, it might be in the Middle East, or it could be Singapore, somewhere like that. The association gets up, and how do they make the decision as to who's going to host the event? I don't think they go to the governments. They go to the association who's the member. And the question is the association who's the national member able to leverage the government dynamics? If you're in a democracy, then depending on how far your event away is, you might be 1 or 2 elections away from when that's going to be. So it's almost not government in the political sense. It might be government at the department sense that may have some more interest in this, because that's where you're looking for the continuity. One of the things about some of the big events in the world, industrial and energy events, is, they're moving to Central Asia and they're moving to the Middle East because some associations have changed their risk profile after COVID. A lot of money up front. And if you want money up front, it's not normally an association that can fund it. It's a government. And if you've got a government that's got whole of government control over the whole sort of economy, and you've got to fork out £1 million or $1 million or two or whatever, that's nothing if your goal to host the event is your nation building and influence exercise. But if your government isn't in nation building or influence exercise, then the event comes back to its natural trade or commercial activity. I think stability of government may be even a more important thing than a particular government. What you're looking for is, associations are risk averse, right? They hate uncertainty. Risk averse and uncertainty. If we select you now, the association I do a lot of work for selected Russia, St. Petersburg, to host their event in 2023 because Russia was in the top 3 in the world in that energy sector. I remember sitting in London in March 2020, what's going to happen? And the association took the event off Russia and it had to go somewhere else. And it went to Canada.
Right.
Now, Vancouver was a compliant bidder, but Vancouver raised because suddenly it's politically stable, it's economically stable, it was probably going to be accessible as the world opened up again post-COVID. There are fewer flights into some countries and you're paying more on some airlines because of COVID. So the tail of it is quite significant. If you're looking to reduce risk and uncertainty, that was a classic example of a reaction that had to be made and a decision that was made that captured political stability, economic stability, legal stability. So it goes back to context. When you're trying to bid to host an event, probably 2 stages, probably a bid and probably a shortlist. Okay?
Yep.
When you say local government, be careful of the word local. Some countries only have 1 level of government. Your country has 3.
3.
We have 3. With 27 million people, we've got 3 levels of government. We've got more politicians than we know what to do with. And quite often, subnational governments more excited about the event coming because it's going to be hosted in their city, but they don't have as much clout in the rest of the world. To be perfectly honest, the government at the subnational level is usually overseeing the provision of the infrastructure and the integration and the things that will make the event work if it's delivered. But it's a national level government or the federal level government who may have some influence. Now, to me, government support is a bit like hotels. If you don't have them, I want to know about it.
Right.
If you do have them, it's not necessarily the thing that's going to swing it. And the other thing would be, what do you want from your government to shortlist you? And what different do you want from the government support to get you appointed? Because I would say if you got shortlisted, you should have already built in a communication with your federal or provincial government, but preferably federal government, to go, if we get shortlisted, we need to up the ante on what is being offered, not offered as in money, but offered as in welcome to our country and this is what we're doing as a nation in the industry sort of thing.
Yes.
We need to up that, because if you just wheel out what you said before, no point of difference. We spoke in the last podcast about the bid that gets you shortlisted will be the bid that loses you unless you treat it differently. So there's an example where I would think that you should plan to say to your federal government, we need this to get shortlisted. If we get shortlisted, we will need this at short notice, because it's usually only a few weeks or months in. And of course, the other irony at the moment is both chatting here and when's your election?
Oh, very soon, in a couple of weeks. So there you go.
But if people are bidding in that window of time, it's more difficult to get a politician. Sometimes it's a department rather than a politician.
Yes. What a meaty question. And I really appreciate all the different perspectives you've brought there, Rodney, because if I hear you right, we've got a lot of different things as a DMO to consider. The length of the actual bid process and when the event would even come. What does that look like from a political cycle perspective? Then what you need to be able to ensure that you can continue to commit to if you have won the bid based on a very proactive political party at the time, and will that continue to live on? I loved the point there about the shortlist and then all of a sudden you've won, and how do you ensure that you have everything on the table and more so for that story? Very interesting. Now, as usual, we've rattled through a whole load of different subjects, which I'm sure has piqued some interest on our audience. If you're now starting to see that Rodney comes with many different global perspectives and you've got a burning question, please let us know. We would love to put that in the future episodes, and we'll continue with these different topics. Episode 3, we're going to go into managing the financial risk in international bidding. So that will be a juicy one. I won't even let you tease us on that one. We'll give you time to stew.
I'll only tease you by saying when we do the next one of these podcasts, I'll be sitting in a country that has a 27% VAT.
Right. So we will not ask you that location until you are in that time zone. That would make a huge difference. Wow. Thank you as always. We do appreciate the insights you're giving. And we are now also going to be doing a write-up alongside these so that we can discuss in a little bit more detail the different pieces that you've brought out for our audience. So definitely some homework pieces here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.